Okay, Mr. DeRozier. Next, we need to figure out how many beats fits in one of those whole notes.
Let's see if the kids know. How many beats fit in a whole note?
If you got 4, you're correct. Put a 4 underneath one of the whole notes. Great job. How many beats does a half note get?
If you answered 2, then you have the correct answer. Draw a 2 underneath your half notes.
How many beats does a quarter note get?
The answer is 1. Draw a 1 underneath your quarter notes.
Now think about this. How many beats does a single eighth note get? If you said 1/2 of a beat, then you're right.
Remember that when you're looking at eighth notes, you want to only look at the note head. That's the kind of the circle at the bottom of the note. That tells you how many there are. So these are 2/8 notes. These are 4/8 notes.
Great. Next, we're going to learn how to draw a treble clef. Go to your first staff. That's the 5 lines. Mark a 1 next to it, because you're on level 1 now. You're going to start by drawing a vertical line on the left side edge of that staff, just like Mr. DeRozier did. Next, you're going to make an arc from the top line inward into the staff and down to the middle line to there. Should look like that. This arc kind of continues to swoop outward, and then it circles around the G line.
Try to make sure that it circles this line right here. That's why we call it a G clef.
Now, if you're a bass clef musician, you need to draw a bass clef. Mr. DeRozier will describe the bass clef.
A bass clef starts on this line here, just above the second highest line. It looks like half of a heart. Now, add a dot above and below the line that would be F. That's why it's also called an F clef.
Excellent. And if you're a drummer, how do you draw a snare drum bass drum clef?
A snare drum bass drum clef looks like a rectangle. Draw a rectangle like this.
Great. Your next task, everyone, is to compose 4 measures of music. You're going to want to start by, there you go, Mr. DeRozier. Let's do a new line there. You're going to want to start by drawing your treble clef,
Or you could draw a bass clef.
or your bass clef, or your drum clef. You're going to want to mark 4/4.
Now this is our time signature. This tells us that there are 4 beats in a measure and that a quarter note equals 1 beat.
Good job. Now go to the far right side of your paper and draw a double bar line. This is when you know when to stop playing, right?
Correct.
In the middle of the paper, make a bar line.
Try to divide that line directly in half. If you do that, then you can divide each side of that line directly in half again, and that will give you the 4 measures you need to complete this part of your project.
Great. In the first measure, you need to fill up that measure of 4/4 time with as many whole notes as it takes to fill up that measure.
At this time, write the correct number of whole notes to fill up the first measure.
In the second measure, you're going to fill up that measure with half notes. How many half notes does it take to fill up that measure?
Remember, you want to make sure you have 4 beats worth of half notes.
Next, you're going to go to the third measure and fill it up with quarter notes. How many quarter notes do you need to fill up a measure?
It's a great question, Mr. Brooks. I hope they get the answer right.
Me too. When you finish that step, you're going to finally do a fourth measure, and you're going to fill it with, guess what? Eighth notes. How many eighth notes does it take to fill up a measure? When you finish that, you have one final step. You need to enumerate all of the notes that you have filled in.
In the first measure, you should have one whole note. That whole note starts on beat number 1, so we'll draw a 1 underneath it.
In the second measure, you should have 2 half notes. The first one starts on beat 1, and the second one starts on beat 3. Why is it beat 3?
That's a really good question. It's beat 3 because the first note of the measure takes up all of beat number 1 and beat number 2.
That's right. Good. Your next measure of quarter notes should be 4 quarter notes. You can enumerate that one by marking each note 1, 2, 3, 4. Finally, you've got a measure of eighth notes. And this is where some people get mixed up. If you can find each beat, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and mark those first, you should be able to get the other eighth notes and mark them as and. Sometimes people call those upbeats, downbeats and upbeats.
This is beat number 1. This eighth note is beat number 2. This eighth note is beat number 3. And this eighth note is beat number 4. Now mark each of the eighth notes that don't have a number underneath them with the and sign. It's a plus symbol. Should look like this.
Some of you may have drawn single eighth notes, like that one, and that's okay.
Make sure that there are 8 eighth notes in this measure. Great job! Move on to the next video now.